Would you stand, please? Thank you. I know I caught you by surprise. Sorry about that. I'm going to do something different today in my sermon. I'm going to preach from here because this is essentially a conversation with our confirmands. The message is for them, but it's also for you and for me. But I think, converse with them better if I'm here where they are. I'll look at some quotes I've got as I need to, but otherwise I'm going to preach here from the center. Our text, which I've chosen for this Sunday, comes to us from the Gospel of Mark, the 10th chapter. I'm reading verses 35 through 45. Let us hear and receive the word of the Lord. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. What do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? Oh, we can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called all of them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. On this Confirmation Sunday, the Word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. One of my favorite anecdotal stories is the story about the 3 men who were talking about status, about how you know when you've got it made that you really have status. The first man said, well, you have status when you're invited to the White House to have a personal conversation with the president. And the second man said, well, no, that's not status. Status is when you're invited to the White House to have a personal conversation with the president, and the red phone, the crisis phone, rings, and the president, while talking to you, doesn't answer it. And the third man said, no, that's not status at all. Status is being invited to the White House for a personal conversation with the pastor, and the red phone with the president, and the red phone, the crisis phone, rings, and the president answers the phone and then hands it to you and says, here, this is for you. We are a culture that talks a lot about status, aren't we? We talk a lot about being number one, about getting to the top, about having it all. Well, sadly, that motif is alive and well right here in this scene from the Gospel of Mark. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem with the disciples, and James and John, 2 of the inner circle, come to him and they say, Lord, we've got a little request. It's not a big deal, and we know you'll want to grant this. And Jesus said, what is it? What do you want? He said, well, would you allow one of us to sit at your right hand and then one of us to sit at your left hand when you come into your glory? Or just a simple thing. We are special to you, we know, so let James sit at your right hand and let John sit at your left hand, and that's all we're asking, Lord. And Jesus, as you know, then talks about servanthood. What I want to do in a culture obsessed with winning, in a culture obsessed with status, in a culture obsessed with getting to the top, to talk about a different kind of winning. I want to talk about being winners for Jesus Christ. And confirmands, this is my message to you primarily this morning, is to invite you, now that you've been on this extensive journey, to become winners for Jesus Christ. Let me tell you how to do that. 4 characteristics of winners for Christ. First of all, winners for Christ make worship a priority. Winners for Christ make worship a priority. One of my favorite verses is found in the 4th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, and it says that Jesus came to Nazareth, and he went into the synagogue, listen to this, as was his custom. Those are powerful words. Jesus comes to Nazareth, and Luke says he went to the synagogue as was his custom. In other words, Jesus made worship a priority in his life. Here's the Son of God, and yet he's making worship a priority in his life because Jesus knew this. He knew that he needed to glorify God, which you do in worship. He knew that he needed to be fed by God, which happens in worship. And he knew he needed to be strengthened for all the demands that are ahead, which happens in worship. Some of you know that some 20 plus years ago, I was the founding pastor of St. Paul United Methodist Church in Cordova, 1988. And you need to know something about that experience. First of all, there was no church. The two districts, the Memphis districts, had bought land off of Davies Plantation Road, right on the corner of Highway 64 and Davies Plantation Road, where that church now stands. But there were no members and there were no buildings. My job was to build a church. Well, for this preacher who had been in ministry for some 20 years at that point, I was having to do something I'd rarely done, and that's go around and knock on doors. I'd have to go knock on doors and say, are you a member of a church somewhere? And if they said no, then I would say, well, would you be interested in a new United Methodist Church that's being formed up on that land that's been bought on Highway 64 and Davies Plantation Road? And some would say yes, and a lot more said no. But there was one man that I'll never forget the conversation we had. While we're talking, and I'm telling him about my plans for St. Paul United Methodist Church, which still has no members at that point, he said to me, he asked me this question, which I'd never been asked before. He said, now you're a preacher. Why do I need to go to church? In other words, personally, why did he need to go to church? He said, I'm a good husband. I'm a good father. He had a major business. He said, I'm good to my employees. I don't cheat on my taxes. I'm a good man. Why do I need to go to church? That's a pretty good question if you think about it, right? He's a good husband. He's a good father. He's a good man. He's a good employer. He doesn't cheat. He seems to do all the right things, and he wants to know why he needs to be here in worship on Sunday morning. And I don't remember everything I said to him, but I do remember some of the things that I said. Essentially, I said this to him. I said, I don't know about you, but I know about me. I'm a preacher, and I need worship. I need worship because I need to be refueled. I need to have some place I come that I can have my spirit lifted and I can be refueled spiritually and emotionally to deal with the rest of the week. And I said, secondly, I need to come to a place where I'm reminded who's in charge of my life, Jesus of Nazareth. You see, the world's not going to remind me, even though I'm a preacher, who's in charge of my life, and the world's not going to remind you, and I'm not indicting the world. The world's not going to remind you who's in charge of your life, but we do here, right? You're reminded that Jesus Christ is in charge of your life. And I said, thirdly, I'm empowered to go and do better. It's the place that I'm empowered to leave and go do better. Now listen to me, confirmands. You got all kinds of reasons in the world not to come to worship. It's boring. I've taught confirmation classes before. I've even had them tell me why they think worship's important. And some of them I remember, one of them said, I don't get anything out of the sermons. I think he said, I don't get anything out of the sermons. Sometimes they make sense. Well, if it's any comfort to you, some of the adults feel that way too. So I want to tell you something, confirmands. You're making a commitment today. You've already made that commitment. Doesn't mean you'll be here every Sunday. Nobody expects that of you. But you ought to be here most of the time, right? This is God's place. You made a commitment when you joined this church that you will be here. So if you have to get those eyes clear, drag yourself out of bed, please do it. Because worship is about winning for Christ. Secondly, winners for Christ live compassionate and kind lives. Winners for Christ live compassionate and kind lives. I don't know if you know the name Jim Murray or not. Jim Murray died in 1998. He was an esteemed sports writer for the Los Angeles Times. He covered every major sports event, the World Series, the Super Bowl, the Wimbledon, the World Cup, NCAA basketball, football, all the things that are the major sports events. Jim Murray covered them. He even won a Pulitzer Prize That's how good he was. Won a Pulitzer Prize for some of his columns. Yet he wrote a column that is remarkable. He talked about having been to all those things. You've been to the Super Bowl, you've been to NCAA March Madness, you've been to the Final Four, you've seen the championships, Wimbledon, World Cup, you name it, he was there. It was when he went to the Special Olympics that he was changed. Let me tell you what Jim Murray said about the Special Olympics. You learn very quickly what is special about the Special Olympics. Nobody was trying to win. There were no losers. I saw the child who lost a 300-yard race by 200 yards, but he was cheered all the way along by his friends standing alongside the track, and then collapsed into the arms of the competitors who congratulated him. There was the time a runner knew that a companion had fallen, and so he turned around, although he was in the lead, and picked him up, and they ran the rest of the race together. And then there was the basketball game in which there were no intentional fouls. Matched on that yardstick, the athletes in the real Olympics are an inferior lot. It is no honor to win the 440-yard dash when a fellow athlete stumbles and falls and you don't have to pick him up. That's what we're about. We're about picking people up. We're about encouraging them along the way. We're about when they stumble and fall, helping them every way we can. We're about looking at those who have been bruised in the battle and doing everything we can, confirmands. You're joining the church this morning, and I'm going to say more about that in a moment, is a profound thing. But you know what's going to define you more than anything as a follower of Jesus Christ is how you treat other people. What are you going to do when bullying occurs? What are you going to do when people get over in their little corner and they talk about each other? They're not a part of the in-group. Let me tell you, adults do that too. I'm not picking on you. Adults are bad. You teach us. You show us that Christians don't bully. You show us how you treat the down and out. You show us how you give time and attention to that one who's over eating by himself or herself in the cafeteria, right? You show us what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. The other thing I would say this morning is winners for Christ believe in the church. I don't know how many of you go on YouTube. I don't do it very often at all. But I came across just a week or so ago an unusual video. It's titled, "I Love Jesus But Hate Religion." And it's put forth by Jefferson Bethke, who is a musician, a poet, a spiritual speaker. And he wrote this poetic piece, which is now on video, 18 million hits. 18 million folks out there hearing the message, "I love Jesus but hate religion." Let me tell you some of what he says in that video clip, and it's only 4 minutes long. Here's what Bethke says. What if I told you Jesus came to abolish religion? I mean, if religion is so great, why has it started so many wars? Why does it build huge churches but fails to feed the poor? Tell single moms God doesn't love them if they've ever had a divorce. Religion might preach grace, but another thing they practice. What if I told you Jesus came to abolish religion? Religion might preach grace, but another thing they practice. Tend to ridicule God's people. They did it to John the Baptist. See, one's the work of God, but one's a man-made invention. See, one is the cure, but the other's the infection. According to Jefferson Bethke, established religion is an infection rather than a cure. Now, I'm going to be the first to admit, and you shouldn't forget this, confirmands, there is no such thing as a perfect church. We're not a perfect church, are we? You know that already. Germantown United Methodist Church is not a perfect church. But I don't want you to ever forget this. The church still matters. We may not be perfect. We may not get everything right. But this I do know. Jesus established the church. The church to which you committed yourself this morning wasn't established by Richard Smith or Julie McKenna. It wasn't established by your parents. It was established by Jesus Christ. You just joined in when you knelt at this altar and took those vows. You just joined in an organization that the greatest person in human history started. Just think about that. The church. Now I'm going to ask you to do something. I want you to take this seriously. I want you to email me. Write me a note. I'm sincere about this. All right, Reverend Julie. Email her if you're not comfortable emailing the senior pastor. I want you to tell me what we can do better. Do you realize you're members of this congregation today? You're equal to your parents. You're equal to me in status. Because you now are full members. You're not partial members. You're not one-half members. You're whole members in the body that Jesus Christ established, and I want us to do better. I want us to be a better church. Will you do that? Raise your hand. Now, you know, if you were sitting out there and the preacher said, raise your hand in front of, 300 people, you'd raise your hand. That was unfair. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I want you to if you'll raise your hand, if you'll think about a way, whether you send it to me or Reverend Julie or not, if you'll think about a way to make us better. Will you do that? Raise your hand. All you got to do is think about it. Well, thank you for that, because I know I put you on the spot. Here's what I'm saying. Believe in the church in spite of our imperfections and help us do better. Now, the final thing I want to say this morning is that winners for Christ give God their best. Winners for Christ give God their best. What's going on right now in the sports world that's so big? What is it? Huh? March Madness. I don't know how your bracket's going, but March Madness is going on. I see some laments out there, so obviously your team did. And we're sad University of Memphis didn't stay. I watched some of the games yesterday, great games. The final two of the Final Four on the men's side will be chosen this afternoon, right? And the Final Four on the women's side will be chosen today and tomorrow. It's been interesting to listen to some of the interviews with the coaches, and I've watched some of the interviews with some of the really, really top-notch coaches, Michigan State and Louisville and Kentucky and even University of Memphis and others. And there's a common thread that every coach says when they're asked this question: how do you get your players to play the way they should play? And every coach in one way or another says this: I expect them to do their very best. We prepared for this moment. We prepared for this day. I expect them to do their very best. I don't know if you're in the band or cheerleading or debate club or chess club or sports or some academic group, but doesn't every coach, every parent volunteer, every leader in your groups expect you to do your best? Right? Whatever group you're in, don't they expect you to do your best? Coaches of those teams in March Madness are saying, let's go get them, guys, gals. Do your very best. Your coaches, your parent volunteers, your leaders are saying to you in all those organizations, do your very best. Why in the world wouldn't we want then to give God our very best, right? If we can give every organization in the world, or for you adults, how about the Lions Club, the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis Club, the Exchange Club? Aren't they asking you to give your very best when you join that organization? Why wouldn't we give God our very best as Christians? To give God our time, to give God our talents. And you're thinking, I'm just a sixth grader. I don't have, listen to me. You do have something to give, and we need it to be the very church we're talking about. Don't for 1 minute say to yourself, I don't know what I can do. We need you. God needs you to give your very best, and your church needs you to give your very best. Now, confirmands, we're going to bring you back up in just a little bit at the end of this service. And I want you to remember when these folks come and greet you that they, with you and me, are trying to be winners for Jesus Christ. And that's what it's all about. It's to make worship a priority. It's to commit to living lives of kindness and compassion out in the world. It's to believe in this even imperfect church. And it's to give God our best. I wish that for you as I wish it for me. Thanks be to God. Amen.